Straight off the bat, this is a sponsored video, so we will be giving away some copies. As always, I'll reply directly to people in the comments. Just let me know what you think of it, really. As the title suggests, I have been ridiculously addicted to a game that I'd never heard of. It's called EcoGnomix, and it comes from the team over at Untold Tales, but was developed by Irox Games. Now, if like me, you hadn't heard of this until right this moment, if the last thing you needed in your life was another very compelling, addictive game, this might not be the one for you. But if you're after something that uses the roguelite formula in a completely unique way and kind of reminds me of the Settlers from back in the day, then EcoGnomix might be your cup of tea. Now, do not fear, we are working on our Mario and Luigi review, but it's taken a little bit longer because the game's absolutely massive. So hopefully that'll be finished by tomorrow. So EcoGnomix then, is it going to tunnel its way into your backlog? Well, let's find out. Now, while there is a little bit of a storyline, I don't want to spoil it too much, but suffice to say, you will find yourself having to delve down into the caverns, digging ever deeper to help you build up your own town. And with that in mind, the game's split into two different halves. On the one half, you've got your town building side, where you'll be adding new buildings, unlocking ones, using different resources that you gathered on your runs or that you're harvesting and then refining in your town, using things like sawmills and then building housing so that people can collect it. But we'll come back to this, because before you do anything else, you need to head down into the cave systems to go on your first run. So upon arriving at the first chamber, you can recruit a couple of gnomes. The gnomes come in different classes. Some of them are for gathering, others have offensive abilities, and then you have a special set of classes that can do a mixture of both, such as the ninjas. The gnomes have a cost to them. This is measured in wood, and you can see both the amount of wood and the amount of meat that you've got at the top of the screen, but there's also one other symbol. What is that, you might ask? Well, it's quite obvious, isn't it? It's a picture of some bats. But the number next to the bats is the amount of them that are going to come and try and steal your food between each turn. Don't worry. Bear with me, it will all make sense momentarily. So what you do is you take your gnomes and you place them, and you might also have noticed that they have an effective field around them, and if a resource falls within that area when you initiate the turn order, well, they'll start to gather it all up. It all sounds oh so simple, doesn't it? The thing is though, these aren't just inanimate objects that you're harvesting. Sometimes there'll be evil trees that can do damage to you, or a slew of other strange enemies, but that's not the main threat. The main threat comes from those bats, because every time you initiate one of your turns, and there's 7 moves per turn, after it, the number of bats indicated right here, they will swoop in and steal your food. If your food resources are entirely depleted, well then they're going to only look to one other source for nourishment, your poor little gnomes. So your run comes to an end when your food does, because your gnomes become a snack. How entirely morbid. Now, for each cavern you enter, you only have to do one turn. You've got some things you can do to bring down the number of bats, or at least to stop the increase. You'll see these small black rocks, and by destroying those quickly, you can stop the number of bats from increasing by 1 per turn. As I mentioned, you only need to complete 1 turn per area, and then you'll enter this little vehicle and head down to the next space. You'll want to strategically choose where you're going to go next, and it's also worth mentioning here that you can only have 4 gnomes, so you don't want to go all attacking ones and not being able to actually harvest any wood, but likewise you don't want to go all the gathering gnomes and not be able to actually do any damage to enemies. So then let's say you choose your next destination. It will have a symbol which indicates the type of thing you're going to find there. For example, a picture of wood. Obviously, you're going to find an abundance of that resource. The same goes for meat. But there are others, like a picture of a chest, and upon entering, you'll be able to open that up and gain a random resource drop. These caverns are crumbling down. The longer you wait, the more ground is going to gradually crumble away. If you're on one of those hexagons when it crumbles, then you'll take 3 points of damage. Of course, if any of your gnomes reaches 0, then they die. A little ghost pops up, and while that might feel quite sad, you'll actually need to use that strategically to get rid of ones you don't want. Say for example, when you're coming up to a boss and you want to switch up your units, it's a good thing to keep in the back of your mind. Now, although you can keep the number of bats down to some degree, with each level you get lower within the cavern, more and more bats are added to this number over here. With that in mind, there's this back and forth struggle. You're trying to increase the amount of meat you're carrying in total, and your net loss or gain is indicated between stages. Let's talk a little bit more about strategy. So for example, one of your units is a boomerang thrower. The boomerang itself can bounce between enemies. Initially it can only do 1 bounce, but you can upgrade that back in your town area to be able to do multiple. You can then position yourself so that you can take out a huge line of these little chickens and gather up a bunch of resources with only a couple of those, but they're not as strong as some of the other offensive classes. And the same can be said for the resource gathering options. One can move, but the other one can gather more. So which you use is up to you, and obviously every unit has a different cost. Sometimes you'll reach an area that allows you to upgrade your gnomes. This is very roguelite-y, isn't it? It's like choosing one of those little skills and then moving on for that run. Placing your gnome, it will cost you a set amount of wood and they'll get a permanent buff, like being able to hover so that ground falling beneath them is no longer an issue. Then you've got your mini bosses. These are bosses, but mini. Oh, you're getting the knowledge here, that's for sure. Now the thing with these is, although they're quite easy to take down, you have to factor in that just by visiting them, you're going to increase the number of bats in your total, but that also if you're not able to take them down in one hit, they're going to do you a serious amount of damage. However, I have found that more often than not, it's better to go for them because they give you such good rewards. Eventually, once you've reached the very murky depths, there'll be a proper, fully fledged boss fight. I was quite intrigued to see how this would work, but what it amounts to is a hybrid between a standard cavern and a standard boss fight. You'll try and gather up some resources, maybe take out those black rocks that spawn the bats, and then every other turn the boss will attack and you'll be able to do damage to it. It's actually really clever. There is some RNG here because obviously you never really know what you're going to get every time you arrive at a new cavern, but win, lose, or just win or lose, you'll take everything back to your village. Now you'll be able to see the amount of resources that you've gathered at the top of the screen, and it's probably from here that you'll head into the skill tree. This is a small building that shows you everything that can be unlocked. As with any good roguelite worth its salt, the meta progression is actually quick and it's instantly quite rewarding as you unlock new units. I mentioned the ninja earlier, but that's a great class because it can attack both enemies, the little chickens, as well as chopping up wood. Over on the right hand side of the skill tree, there are those risk reward options as well. The ones that give you something good, but they also take away, usually in the form of your gnome's health. So with these resources, you'll be able to start to build new buildings, increase the size of your town, build new houses so you have more gnomes available on the surface to gather up those resources, and you can build paths, decorative items, a lot of which you'll actually find by just beating enemies and stuff. But of course you'll unlock some permanent skill upgrades. There are things like a map which allows you to entirely skip one of the caverns, which can be a complete lifesaver in a pinch. But there's also extra wood and meat so that you start your runs with a slight advantage. Now the skill tree is actually divided into sections, and the gatekeeping aspect there is beating the end of area boss. And it's not just once, you'll have to beat them 3 times, and they're harder each time because the first time you're only beating a third of their health bar, the second 2, and so on. But as you unlock a new region, you'll also have a huge upgrade to the skill tree and suddenly find a load more motivation as well as beneficial items that you can create. The controls are pretty straightforward. There are a couple of tweaks that I'd make, like using the D-pad left and right or up and down to select the next unit rather than having to manually do so. But really, it's easy. You pick them up and plonk them where you want them, then hit X to initiate the turn. Visually, we've got quite a nice low poly art style, but chiefly we've got performance that isn't an issue. It runs at 30 FPS, which is fine for a strategy hybrid, and as your town gets larger, the frame rates don't get smaller. Now, I'm sure once the town is absolutely maxed out, there's the potential there, but I've gone quite large here and experienced no slowdown at all. On runs, it's also a similar picture, and I'm glad to say the team have obviously put some work into optimization on the Switch build. As for handheld mode, well, it looks lovely. Is there touch screen? You'll know right now because I'll be showing it on the screen if there is. The music's quite fun, but it can be a little bit repetitive, but not to the point where it became an issue for me. Still, a few more tracks would have been nice. These are tied to the levels. However, when there's a boss fight, it does switch up a little. That then takes us on to value. The RRP is £16.75, which doesn't sound too bad, does it? There is a 20% launch discount though that goes on until November the 21st. Certainly in the American regions, it's $15.99 at the moment, which is a cracking little price for something that honestly I can't really think of many other options within this slightly unique genre. It's just a 353 megabyte download as well. As for physical, there's no news at the moment. It would be quite a nice one actually to have physically. We need more strategy on Switch for sure. So that's it for this one. Let me know down in the comments, is this one that interests you? I've got to give away those 2 copies, so yeah, let me know your thoughts and I'll reply directly to you down there. A big thank you to our Patreons, our members, all of you that enjoy the content, and as always, for all things Switch, all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers guys. See ya!